Hello, welcome to episode 137 of the Book Binge, where this week we're doing another top 10 video, but this time looking at my top 10 sci-fi stories that I want to read after Sun Eater. Now, I've already read through the main series of Sun Eater so far as it is released up to this point, so why do I say after Sun Eater? Well, it's because I'm currently working on a reread where I'm also doing some behind-the-scenes work to help with the diamond editions, the special editions of those books, to be a slight bit more polished than maybe they otherwise would be. So I'm currently doing rereads of the books right now, and thus don't really have enough time to just fit in those extra few books that I otherwise would over the course of the year, which I kind of regret for that reason, but I have been enjoying my time with that series. But that's what the purpose of today's video is, to look forward and see some of the sci-fi stories that I most want to prioritize after all of that work is done. Now, there's a specific reason right before we start. Sorry, this is going to be a little bit more preamble. The reason that I say sci-fi stories here is because some of these are standalones, some of these are series. So that's, pretty easy to explain. There are a couple items on this list that I actually don't own yet that I'm now realizing after putting together the list and coming to record it, but that is fine. That just means that I'll have a couple images to show over here at the appropriate times. Without further ado, let's jump into just a couple quick honorable mentions before we get into the bulk of the list. First off, I want to talk briefly about The Dragon Riders of Pern by Anne McCaffrey, which is, some people are going to say, well, that's a fantasy book, but then there are going to be some people who are just like, no, this is actually a sci-fi book. This is kind of in that middle of science fantasy, that realm of fiction where whether you consider it one or the other just kind of depends on who you are or even where you are in the series. But this is a book that I do want to get to, this trilogy, I suppose, this collection that I have here. Is part of why it's an honorable mention, because it is kind of in that blurry space there, but it is one that I've had my eye on for quite a few years and so want to give a shot sooner than later. But it will probably end up being later, let's face it. That's just how it's probably going to be. My next honorable mention is going to be a little bit more of a general inclusion, so not like a specific book or series, but a general author, that being Michael Crichton. So I picked the example of Jurassic Park and The Lost World because they're the easy ones to include here, but there are some of his other books such as Sphere or Prey, or even like State of Fear, for example, that I would include here for the science fiction stuff. But I do plan to read all of Michael Crichton's stuff that he wrote under this name. Now that they're releasing hardcovers right now, I think, actually, of his stuff that he wrote under the name of John Lang. I want to check out some of that stuff at some point too. But Michael Crichton is an author that I want to get to reading a little bit more of. In fact, I plan to read at least a couple more of his books this year, even though I don't know if either of those are sci-fi, actually. One of them might be, but one of them might not be. Either way, those are the honorable mentions. So let's move on now into item number 10 on the list, that being a quick duology, as quick as you can consider 2 pages or 2 books that are like 700 to 900 pages long, Ilium and Olympos by Dan Simmons. Simple duology coming as recommendations from Jonathan at Words in Time and Christopher Rocchio, author of The Sun Eater. Yes, I want to read this before Hyperion. Sorry to the people who really like Hyperion, but for whatever reason, these intrigue me a little bit more, being a sort of epic sci-fi series that are based in large part on the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer, which are a couple of my favorite reads. So I definitely want to give them a shot because of that. It just seems like the perfect storm of really weird stuff that I think I'd probably enjoy, especially when it comes to sci-fi. Speaking of weird sci-fi, let's talk about some Stanislaw Lem. I hope I pronounced the name right. I probably butchered it. That's my apologies. But Solaris, his most popular book, his most well-known book, which is a book that I find to be a little bit shorter than I expected it to be. But I know nothing about this, generally speaking, other than it is quite legendary within the sci-fi sphere. It's more of a bucket list item because of how many people know of it, how many people have read it, and how most people really like it for what it is. It's a book that I actually did have spoiled for me at one point, about one of the major things that it's about, but I've since forgotten it, which is really good, so that I can actually go into that blind. Whereas for a little while I was thinking I wasn't going to be going into it blind, so that's also nice. Next up is a book that is a trilogy that I only own the first book of, but if I really like the first book, I will continue the trilogy. I'm interested in the trilogy anyway because all the covers are just fantastic. That is the Children of Time trilogy by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I, at the very least, like I said, want to get to this first book sooner than later because I think basically all of my friends who have read it really, really love it. It's just a really, really well hyped book. Of course, I might go into it and really dislike it, despite all the hype, but it is one that I'm really interested in. It's regarded really highly on its own. But like I said, I do want to get to the whole trilogy, especially if I enjoy this one more than I don't. Tchaikovsky seems like such a legend within the sphere, especially with the speed that he writes. It seems like every time you look, you know, to your left and then to your right, he wrote a book in that time, basically. So this is probably the best place to start, at least where sci-fi is concerned. So there is that. Next up is a personal favorite of a couple friends of mine. I didn't actually grab the book and put it on my stack here, so I need to grab that real quick. And that is Permutation City by Greg Egan. So a hard sci-fi book of the type and style that I actually don't really have much experience with. So when it comes to like the truly hard sci-fi, this is probably going to be where I end up starting with that on account of recommendations, again, from Jonathan and from a couple other people as well. This is one of his favorites. I kind of want to read this with Mason, assuming that you haven't actually read that yet. I don't remember if you have or not. I know that Mason was the one who gifted this to me for my birthday, I think, so I do want to get to it with him because of that. Maybe we'll see if the timeline ends up working out for that or not. I'm not sure if it will, but you know, one can always hope. Number 6 on this list is part of a series, and if you know which series it is, you probably understand why. It is Dune Saga by Frank Herbert. I have read this first book. I read it in February of 2022, so it's been a couple years now, strangely enough. And it's a book that I really enjoyed. I didn't like love it, but I did really enjoy it. I decided I wasn't really interested in continuing at that time with Messiah or Children of Dune, but I know that at some point in the future I want to reread Dune, and so I'll definitely do that with these sequels. And I actually want to read through God Emperor because of the reputation that God Emperor of Dune has for the philosophy and similar type of stuff like that. I think it would be up my alley. But that's basically where I plan to stop. I do not plan to read books 5 and 6. Just kind of one of those funny things. Depending on who you ask, certain people will recommend you only read the first one. Some people will say read through Messiah, read through Children of Dune. Some will say read through God Emperor. But basically, nobody says to stop at 5. Like, if you're going to read past God Emperor, you're reading all 6, basically. But either way, whenever the deluxe version of God Emperor becomes a thing to match these first 3, that might be when I consider rereading them, but who knows? My saying that might mean that that gets announced like in 2 days, so who knows? Hopefully not, because I don't have time to I don't have time to include them that early on at this point. Next up on the list is another sort of part of a series, but I have interest in the whole saga as well. It is the Ender Saga, and thus by proxy the Shadow series as well. Because each of these series has 5 books, and then there's another 11th book that kind of wraps up both series at once. This is, of course, Ender's Game, Speaker of the Dead, or Speaker for the Dead, and then, of course, all the books that come after. I hold the really, well, maybe not really unpopular opinion, but the somewhat unpopular opinion of really liking the Ender's Game movie, and it was actually the reason that I wanted to check out the book in the first place. And because I don't have a whole lot of nostalgia for Ender's Game, I feel like I could actually read the entire series and maybe not feel so beholden to the first book that I won't allow for anything afterwards to exist. Because, you know, the rest of the books afterwards seem to have a really, really mixed reception. Basically, everything after the first book, even including the second book. I know plenty of people who say to read through these 2, and that's it, but I want to read all 11 of them because I'm a crazy person and because I have no regard for other people's opinions sometimes. Number 4 on this list is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, another series that plenty of people will give you different recommendations on how far to read. Most people, I think, really love the first 2 books. The third book, I think, is broadly the least popular, and then 4 and 5 are kind of hit or miss depending on who you ask. I do also plan to read all 5 of the books in the series, but at the very least the first one. It's one that I can remember from as early as like elementary school. My older brother reading it and finding it to be like the funniest book in the world, and I still have the image of that version of the cover like stuck in my head. It's a really iconic cover, so it's one that I want to get to sooner than later, and one that I feel like would prepare me for some other reads. It's a favorite of my friend Reen's, similar to Discworld, which is a fantasy series that you know, kind of similar in a British humor kind of way. They're maybe not necessarily super similar in their humor styles or whatever, but I feel like absurdist, satirical, humor focused books like that might help me get into something like Discworld, which I otherwise am not necessarily super keen on getting into at the moment, but we'll see how things happen. The next couple items on this list I actually don't own copies of as of the moment. The number 3 spot is another standalone book by Alistair Reynolds. It is House of Suns. This is one that will probably be the first new space opera I read after I finish Sun Eater, doing all my reread stuff there, partially because it's standalone, but also because, it seems like a really interesting book. Alistair Reynolds has a pretty great reception, and I'm really interested in this book, especially as one also recommended to me by Jonathan at Words in Time. This seems like a great way to dip my toe into Reynolds' work because of the standalone thing, and because the concept just sounds really great. Number 2 on this list is The Expanse series by James S. A. Corey, a series that it will probably be the first space opera series that I read after Sun Eater, despite it being a little bit longer. It's one that I have great interest in. I hear great things about for the most part, and it seems to be up my alley. Plus, it has a character with my name, so that will always be fun to read about. That'll be a little bit interesting, a little bit weird to read, but it is one that I do want to get to nonetheless. And because it is also complete, online books are done. Plus, there's a short story novella collection or something like that. There's just the 10 bindings, and they all look really slick. The covers are really cool in their way, so I do want to pick up a set of those and give those a shot at some point in time. The number 1 item on this list is probably going to flip some tables. Some people watching this are going to flip some tables at it. It's kind of an internal joke. Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I love The Martian, both the book and the movie. I've read the book 2 or 3 times. I think 3 times, maybe even 4. And I've watched the movie a couple of times, and the climax of that just always gets me. I love that story a lot. I've also hold down popular opinion of thinking that Artemis is pretty good. I find it to be incredibly underrated. Of course, I haven't read it in a long time. I read it release year, so that was like 2017 or something like that, so it's been a long time. And based on my memory, I could be wrong, but I remember enjoying it when I read it, so I think it was good. And of course, I've heard great things about this one. A lot of people consider it to be on the exact same level as The Martian. Some people prefer The Martian slightly, some people prefer this one slightly, so it just kind of depends on what you're into. We'll see. I definitely do want to give this a shot because I enjoy Andy Weir's style, because I enjoy his humor, because I enjoy his protagonist, and because I enjoy the way that he genuinely writes a story, the way that he does the sci-fi thing. I have no reason to believe that I won't enjoy Project Hail Mary. Quite frankly, I don't think I will dislike it. And since Weir reads pretty quick, I definitely want to use these as palate cleansers sooner than later as well. And speaking of soon, I'm actually reading this list right now and realizing that I might actually have this marked in for March to read with Minna. So that's exciting. I completely forgot about that somehow. So I'm actually going to go ahead and go back and mark that in my TBR for next month so that I don't forget. I'll also have to confirm with her as soon as I'm done recording this to make sure that that is still happening, if she's still into it or if she's got too much on her plate still, because she always has like 12 books ongoing. Not that many, but it seems like it. But there you have it. That is my list of my top sci-fi ideas. The stories that I want to read soon. If you have any more ideas, throw them at me. And I'm actually surprised to find that there are plenty of sci-fi books and series that I own, that I have on some of the shelves here, that I could not include on this list because it's only a top 10 list. I might have to make another top 5 or 10 after this and at some point down the road. I didn't realize there was so much sci-fi that I own that I haven't read yet, but I guess it's because basically all of the sci-fi I own I haven't read yet. Yeah, like I said, if you have any more recommendations, go ahead and throw them at me in the description below. Also consider checking out my 2 collaborations that I did with Jonathan from Words in Time earlier in 2023. Both of those came out, both recommending me sci-fi books or series based off of my love for Sun Eater and also just based off of general topics. So, that's where plenty of the items on this list come from, are from those videos. So yeah, if you want to check those out, I greatly recommend them. I'll probably include them in the end title or the end card of this video, so I'll get there and let you see what those videos are all about. But thank you guys for watching. I'll be back next Tuesday with a review of Majority by Abby Goldsmith. I'll see you guys there.